Mock Draft Monday, and what a Monday it is. Of course, the NBA Draft Lottery just took place minutes ago. I am now recording my immediate mock draft reaction to that, and wow, as a Dallas Mavericks fan, I am ecstatic. First of all, do I think the Dallas Mavericks actually deserve this pick? No, I don't think so. Will people be saying it's rigged? 100% they will be saying that. There was already a lot of people skeptical about Adam Silver's absence of involvement in the Luka Doncic trade to Los Angeles, and now the Mavericks get rewarded the first overall pick. A lot of suspicion there, but all in all, with the way the actual draft lottery process works and pans out, very clearly I don't actually believe this is rigged. I think the Mavericks got very lucky. Out of 1,000 combinations, they had just 18 combos that would have awarded them the first overall pick, and subsequently with that selection, Cooper Flagg out of Duke, and this Mavericks team with Nico Harrison making one of the biggest questionable moves of all time in NBA history, the Mavericks now find themselves in a great position. An injury at the end of the year to Kyrie Irving, a devastating series of absences throughout this year with Daniel Gafford. The season from hell for Dallas ends in pure joy. The franchise savior again is here now with Cooper Flagg finding his way to the American Airlines Center there in Dallas, Fort Worth area. And Mavericks fans have to be ecstatic. I know I am. This franchise, do they deserve it? No. But they get a player who fits into this newfound team identity where Cooper Flagg is going to be afforded opportunities on the basketball. He's going to be able to initiate action. I think if you go back and look at every 45 action that he ran this past year with Khaman Maluach, big to big type action where Flagg measured in quite well again at the NBA Combine. There is a lot to love here for the Dallas Mavericks specifically, and I think Cooper Flagg, with his ability as a ball handler, decision maker, scorer, his two-way play, this is the ideal player for Dallas to have put on this roster alongside Anthony Davis, alongside that elite front court that they have built that features Derik Lively, PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford. And then once Kyrie Irving comes back from healthy, now you're really cooking with gas. This Mavericks team is going to be very, very, very good next season. This drastically changes their long-term outlook. Something that clearly, when the trade Nico Harrison made at the deadline in February, was not on his mind. He was not anticipating this team having a legitimate chance at the first overall pick. Yet here they are, some really bad decisions, some questionable moves, still sometimes pan out well. The Western Conference gets even stronger here. I thought this lottery was a great opportunity for the East to build out and really strengthen the bottom of their conference if they got the top picks. Just did not happen for them here. Dallas walks away the victors, get Cooper Flagg in this year's class. What a home run opportunity for Dallas to right some of their previous wrongs and completely change the long-term direction and course of this franchise. Cooper Flagg in Dallas is going to be feeding families for a long time. Then at number 2, the San Antonio Spurs jump up to this spot as well. They, remember, had the 8th best odds coming into the night with just a 6% chance at the first overall pick. They do come up just a hair short, but second overall, this is still a great opportunity for them. One that's a little questionable in terms of fit. Could this be a trade chip to go out for someone like Giannis Antetokounmpo? That is a real question. Would the Spurs look to use this pick in that way? That's a huge question. But in this mock draft, I'm doing no trades. I do ultimately have San Antonio here, second overall, selecting guard Dylan Harper. Now, this is a weird fit because they did trade for De'Aaron Fox. They did draft Stephon Castle a year ago. You could argue that the Spurs should look wing or forward, someone like an Ace Bailey at this spot, or should they look at a big man? This becomes a real prime trade chip, like I talked about, either in a push your chips in to go get Giannis right now type of move, or a trade down move where you get a bunch of future assets. Can you move down to pick number 5 or pick number 6, give up pick number 2 in the process, get future draft control from another team, something we've seen San Antonio do quite a bit. But nonetheless, Dylan Harper, if you are just picking and going best player available, I do think 99% of the teams will land with Dylan Harper as the most likely consensus number 2 player on their board. He's not a prospect without flaw. There are definitely some concerns here in terms of his ability to maintain 3-point success and volume, But all in all, I love everything about him as a prospect when it comes to the ball handling, the decision making, the rim frequency, which is all very good. He has one of the best handles in this entire draft class, very creative as a prospect with a variety of different ways to get downhill, whether it's splitting in the pick and roll, some nifty behind the back dribbles, a lot to work with here from a skill set. An emerging pull-up shooter as well, something that when I turn back on the film and watch and go back and look for different things every time I'm watching, I am rather impressed with Dylan Harper's pull-up volume. I do think there's some meaningful progression he can make here. And with Dylan Harper's massive wingspan, about 6'10" wingspan, I think the Spurs can look at it as, hey, the more talent we have, the better. A backcourt with Castle, who's defensively versatile. Backcourt with Dylan Harper, who's defensively versatile. Earlier this year against Illinois, he was defending Will Riley, who projects to be a wing forward in the NBA. So Dylan Harper can guard up and down lineups a little bit. You can also do that same thing with Stephon Castle, change your matchups depending there. And then De'Aaron Fox, obviously very athletic, quick, not a great defender, but I think blends in enough athletically where he's not a complete weak point. The Spurs just playing 3 guards might make sense in terms of putting and flushing talent around Victor Wembanyama. It's a weird fit a little bit. It's one where if I have more time to think of trades and possible avenues for San Antonio to change the roster, maybe something different comes to fruition here. But I just want to go with Dylan Harper, second overall still in this mock draft. Pick number 3, the Philadelphia 76ers here now. They ultimately do get the 3rd pick. I did predict this before the lottery. I didn't predict anything else though. Oh my goodness, what a crazy lottery this was. 3rd overall, I do have Philadelphia here swinging on the upside for wing/forward Ace Bailey, someone who does come with his own flaws in terms of the on-ball creation questions. He was 99th percentile in volume in isolation, but wasn't the most successful player in that play style. And specifically, a lot of that stems from lack of functional play strength, lack of footwork. There's a lot of room for him to grow in some really necessary areas for him to be an elite on-ball player. But you put him in Philadelphia where maybe you can maximize some of his physical traits, his elite rebounding for his position. He gets on the offensive glass really well. He's an active defender, shot blocker, someone who utilizes his athleticism in a variety of different ways that do make him a valuable piece in some team context. And I think for Philadelphia, you already have a lot of ball handling with Maxey, Embiid. Obviously, Paul George is comfortable with the ball in his hands. We'll see if he can have a bounce back here next year. This also becomes a trade chip. Could the Sixers look to use this pick and Paul George's contract to wiggle around, move their situation a bit, and see if they can save money on Paul George's contract long-term, go out and get somebody else that could help them win at a higher level now? That's a question, but Ace Bailey, a bit of a project pick here, but definitely some tools to work with, some real functional strengths that help him as a cutter. Very interested in how he would play off of Embiid in that way, and then also getting on the glass. Maybe this is Embiid's version of Michael Porter Jr., like what we've seen Jokic working with in Denver for a while. Now, Ace Bailey did measure in just a little bit over 6'7" without shoes on, which is very disappointing compared to his listed 6'10" height. He's not as long and lengthy as everyone else seems to think. And will that hurt his draft stock? Possibly, but I do have the Sixers here with their loaded backcourt with Maxey and McCain, avoiding VJ Edgecombe with this pick and going with Ace Bailey instead in this mock draft. Moving on to pick number 4. Charlotte's not going to miss out on the opportunity here to add someone in the backcourt that can help them big time. Charlotte, funny enough, I did predict to get the 4th overall pick as well. Here they are now with this spot, and I have them drafting guard VJ Edgecombe out of Baylor, someone who in that backcourt specifically they're looking at as a player who can be a long-term upside grab with some sneaky downhill creation tools, some very unique deceleration gifts that is mirroring some star players, star guards, especially in the NBA. You hear comparisons to Dwayne Wade, you think about a potential comparison to Anthony Edwards. While the body type, physical gifts are somewhat similar, I do think there is a pretty significant skill difference from the existing version right now of Anthony Edwards and where VJ Edgecombe is. If you are predicting or projecting that kind of upside, there's a lot of skill work that has to go into that development. And listen, Anthony Edwards was the same way coming out of Georgia. He had a ton of work to do on his game. His handle wasn't reliable. His playmaking feel wasn't quite where it is now, especially when it comes to making reads live in the pick and roll. And then also the pull-up shooting was abysmal at Georgia, now one of his greatest strengths in the NBA. So that's one of the hardest things about scouting and projecting players is sometimes you take calculated risks about a guy's work ethic and his ability to improve and the functional tools he has to get better. And VJ Edgecombe checks a lot of those boxes. Someone who, coming from the Bahamas, has worked really hard on his game, has really allowed himself to grow and blossom and develop. He was productive for Baylor as a true freshman, even though he was being used in a role by Scott Drew that I probably wouldn't have used him in myself as an off-ball movement player. Now, part of that is because he didn't trust VJ Edgecombe's on-ball creation skills, but the points, rebounds, assists were still there. I think one of the biggest questions for Edgecombe throughout the early stages of his career, while he's putting up those counting stat numbers, can he do it efficiently and effectively in a winning context? And Charlotte, that's going to be the big question for them long-term as well. Can they translate some of their perimeter talent in LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller, and now VJ Edgecombe? Can they turn it from, hey, we have some good young players to, hey, can we win with these good young players? And I think Charlotte does have an uphill battle. They need a lot more starting caliber players in their roster, but VJ Edgecombe is a step in the right direction for their overall roster. And then defensively, you're hoping you can maximize his athletic gifts, physical tools, ability to contain the basketball, mirror the ball handler, and ultimately all of that athleticism pays off in a big way as a play finisher as well off of LaMelo there in Charlotte. Moving on to pick number 5, the Utah Jazz here now. Utah, man, what a disappointment, and Pistons fans can relate to you. So if you're a Pistons fan watching this, try and console some of the Jazz fans in the comment section. Remember, there is about a 48% chance that this is what happens. If you have the worst record in the NBA, you're not guaranteed a top 4 pick anymore. With the lottery changes, you find yourself in this situation fairly frequently, and that's unfortunately what happened here for Utah, a franchise that has not had a top 2 pick previously. They'll have to wait another year. They don't get a top pick this year. Instead, at number 5, they take Tre Johnson out of Texas, someone who I do think can really fill it up. And if you're looking at what this Jazz team is missing, I think specifically reliable scoring punch from the backcourt, someone who can actually create off the dribble, score for himself, and do it in a variety of ways. This is still kind of a puzzle piece fit for Utah. Tre Johnson doesn't solve all of this team's concerns. I still think that they do need a long-term lead guard who can score and initiate offense equally, and that's hard for them right now. They have a scoring guard in the backcourt in Keontae George. They have a passing guard in Isaiah Collier. If they could blend those two people into one guy and make him way better defensively, that would be the lead guard of the future. They can't do that. So right now, Utah still has a huge need. I think that they have some unique pieces on their roster for sure. You look at, obviously, Lauri Markkanen, one of the best play finishers in the NBA. You have Walker Kessler, who I do believe in long-term. They have some other draft and develop guys. Kyle Filipowski had a great rookie season. Cody Williams is still someone that they're waiting to see on. Take 2-3 years for him to really start hitting his stride in the NBA, in my opinion, which is okay. Utah has time here. Really, at this point, the Jazz are now focused on the 2026 NBA draft lottery. I hate to say it, but it's the reality. Tre Johnson can really score the ball, though. There's some long-term upside where he maybe turns into a Tyler Hero-type player that can be an impactful scorer on a quality team. We've seen Tyler Hero fill that role in the past, both in the regular season and postseason. Now the hope is that Tre Johnson can be a little bit of lightning in the bottle for the Utah Jazz after drafting him here 5th overall in this mock draft. Pick number 6, man, Washington. I really thought Cooper Flagg was destined for DC. Just did not happen here. But doesn't mean Washington is dead in the water. 6th overall, they still have the ability to go out, find a quality player, draft someone who can be a core piece for their future long-term, and I do think they need more offense. I think they need specifically someone who can fit in the front court alongside Alex Sarr, creating one of the most dominant, dynamic front court tandems offensively and defensively that the league has to see. And 6th overall, I have the Washington Wizards sticking in the DMV area, selecting center/forward Derik Queen out of Maryland, and this is an absolute home run pick in my opinion for Washington. I currently have Queen ranked 3rd on my big board for the 2025 NBA draft cycle, and I am enamored with Derik Queen as a prospect. I think his skill set, his ability to get to the free throw line, which is really predicated on his coordination, ability to handle the basketball and leverage his frame body to get to certain spots on the floor. I think as he continues to progress his body, get into an NBA training program, he's going to get a little bit stronger. He's going to get even a tad bit quicker, which is one of his best traits on the basketball already as a face-up big man. This is where Washington runs into a really dangerous 4-5 pairing with Queen and Alex Sarr working off of each other. Queen found a ton of success playing with Julian Reese for Maryland this past year, and now you give him someone like Alex Sarr, who's a far more skilled player, especially when it comes to stepping out behind the three-point line. As the year progressed, we saw Alex Sarr get more and more comfortable in DC, and I think for Queen specifically, there's not many better defensive options for him to land at than with Washington. His fit with the Wizards is very, very, very strong, and I think specifically for Washington, if they're able to pair him with Sarr's rim protection, Queen's ability to challenge out on the perimeter, defend out in space a little bit, this is a home run, dream come true scenario for the Washington Wizards. Still, even though, again, yes, you would have loved to have a top 4 pick, you would have loved to bring Cooper Flagg back to DC with you, I still think walking away, getting Derik Queen, forming a really, really strong 4-5 combination, which a lot of the best teams in the league have right now. OKC with Holmgren and Hartenstein. Look at Cleveland with Mobley and Allen. You look across the league, what Dallas is going to have now with Davis, Flagg, and also their front court with Washington, Gafford, Lively. You need size in the league. You need skilled size. And the Wizards now have not one, but 2 special skilled players in the front court with Derik Queen and Alex Sarr both offering different, unique skill sets at their listed heights. Pick number 7, New Orleans. Again, a devastating blow for them. They had such an injury-riddled season, and they walk away now with only the 7th overall pick to show for it. Pretty devastating, especially after trading away Brandon Ingram. This is a low-key nightmare situation for them, but a player here who does have some real top 5 juice. I think, depending on how the lottery would have shook out, I could have seen myself mocking this guy as high as pick 4 or pick 5 tonight. Instead, I have him mocked 7th overall. That is guard Jeremiah Fears out of Oklahoma. This is the Pelicans' opportunity to go out, get a shifty ball handler with some real shot creation upside, something they chose to not do in Zion Williamson's draft when they passed on the pick that could have been Darius Garland, traded it back for 2 selections at, I believe, picks 10 and 17, which became Jackson Hayes and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. New Orleans missed big time with that situation. As a result, they've really struggled to find real backcourt steady play. They ended up making a trade later for CJ McCollum. They've tried to patch it up, traded for DeJounte Murray. They just haven't had long-term core options there for New Orleans. Even going back to when they acquired Lonzo Ball, there was hopes that he could be a long-term piece. Obviously, they traded Drew Holiday. There's just been so much turnover for New Orleans in that backcourt. The hope here is that Jeremiah Fears, if you buy into his potential, you buy into his talent, shot creation skills, the handle, which is extremely electric, there is a lot to love. Did measure in at about 6'2.5" without shoes on. He's got okay prototypical point guard size. He's not a huge point guard. He's not a tiny one either. He's just an okay sized point guard. And with how much he relies on having the ball, I do think there's some problems. But this becomes one of the best fits with Zion Williamson, someone who has some really unique low or short roll passing skills. Jeremiah Fears with Zion Williamson, I do have a lot of fun envisioning this duo together. I think they've become a really unique, dynamic duo there in New Orleans, one that would be a lot of fun to watch. Moving on to pick number 8, Brooklyn came into the night with the 6th best odds, ultimately fall down to pick number 8. Pretty devastating situation and outcome for them as well. But 8th overall here, I have the Brooklyn Nets now at this spot, selecting guard Kasparas Jakucionis out of Illinois. And for Brooklyn, I've loved Derik Queen for them. He goes at number 6 in this mock draft for me to Washington, which now puts Brooklyn kind of in a little bit of a holding pattern of trying to figure out the direction of their franchise. Are they going to be able to make a pursuit at Giannis? Part of that was kind of the idea of, hey, maybe we can pair him with Cooper Flagg, or maybe we can pair him with Dylan Harper if we get a top 2 pick in the 2025 NBA draft. Doesn't pan out that way. Could this asset be the starting point to go after and go out and get someone like a Giannis Antetokounmpo? Very possible. This pick could be involved in trade discussions. If not, though, I think Jakucionis, his work off the basketball fits really, really well into Jordi Fernandez's offense, where everything Jakucionis does is at high speed, high pace, decisive action. And while, yes, it comes with its fair share of problems like turnovers, a very heavy three-point reliant attempt rate because of his inability to win off of isolation and just purely with his handle and burst, there are some definite negative outcomes here for Kasparas Jakucionis, but at the same time, landing in Brooklyn, playing out of certain actions, playing out of delay, playing off of handoffs, this maybe is one of the best outcomes for him to generate easier advantage for him, be able to really weaponize his playmaking skill, and he measured in decently at the combine as well. So I think for Brooklyn, all things considered, this is still an okay outcome for them. Kind of forces them to maybe pedal in the water a little bit, try and figure out where they're at. How does this affect their future plans? How does this affect their cap spending this offseason? We'll see. I think Brooklyn becomes one of the fascinating teams. Again, this is my immediate reaction to the lottery. So Jakucionis, I do think, makes good sense for Brooklyn from an actual scheme roster standpoint right now. But again, I'm fairly disappointed for Brooklyn to not ultimately walk away with a top 4 pick in this draft for the way that they've built their team and the way they have flexibility this offseason. Pick number 9, the Toronto Raptors here now. They moved down a couple of spots as well, with teams like San Antonio and Dallas jumping up to the top 2. Toronto is one of those unlucky teams that falls down a few spots here as well, going from the 7th best odds down to pick number 9. But they're still a great player here, one that I have mocked in recent mocks for them, and I'm going to continue to do so in this one. 9th overall, yes, Raptors fans, I am mocking you center Khaman Maluach out of Duke. I still think this is a huge impact pick. He had a plus 53.0 net rating this past year in an entire college basketball season for Duke. And yes, that is not a typo. No, I did not misspeak. Plus 53.0 per 100 possessions. Duke was 53 points better than their opponents when Khaman Maluach was on the floor. That is about 16 points per 100 possessions better than what Cooper Flagg was this year. Now, yes, Flagg played more minutes, but Maluach was utterly dominant when he was on the floor, helping Duke really destroy some college basketball teams. Now, in college basketball, size can be everything, and that's what Khaman Maluach really presents. Nearly stood at 7'1" without shoes on at the NBA Combine today. Very, very impressive stuff. I think all things considered, Khaman Maluach is going to be a name that you have to keep your eyes on. I've talked about his screen setting, the value that that can bring, setting up Emmanuel quickly in their offense, setting up Brandon Ingram. The Raptors are not shy when it comes to pull-up shooting talent with Ingram and quickly there on the roster. You also think about Grady Dick playing off of wide pin action. Maluach is going to have a lot of functionality into this offense, even if he never shot the basketball. And then what we do know is he has some upside long-term, growing into more of his touch. Obviously exerts a ton of rim gravity as a screen roll big man, considered in the dunker spot. I think there's a lot of flexibility that Toronto can open up there if they go out and try and either find a way to upgrade their point guard spot right now, something they could look to do. Maybe cough Trae Young. Or the other option is just flat out hoping that Quickly and Barnes can form this unique 1-4 actions pick and roll where Quickly can get the ball to Scotty Barnes in the middle of the floor, around the nail, and then from there, Barnes with a lob threat like Maluach on the backside of the rim would be really, really fun to watch. I do think for Toronto specifically, while yes, you do have Jakob Poeltl, Maluach is a guy I'm not projecting to play 35 minutes a game right away, especially not the first year or two of his career. I do think having a center in place, allowing Maluach to learn, grow, this is still a very good outcome for Khaman Maluach as a player individually, in my opinion. And Toronto gets to bolster their defense, add another rim protector into the mix, and just really strengthen everything. And one guy I do like his fit with quite a bit is Jonathan Mogbo, who has the ability to just kind of muck stuff up. Obviously has elite length as well, and really makes himself known and seen defensively. So I think for Toronto, this is a great outcome and one that does make some good sense for them given their roster construction. Pick number 10, the Houston Rockets fall down a spot here with the Dallas Mavericks jumping up, but there's still very talented prospects on the board, and one specifically that I love as a fit for Houston. What is one thing this team needs to do way better? Every Rockets fan says it in unison here: shoot the damn basketball. And that's what we're going to help them do. 10th overall, I have them selecting wing Knueppel out of Duke, arguably the best shooter in this year's draft. There's a few others in that contention. Trey Johnson, who we had go a few picks ago, number 5 to Utah, and then also Kobe Brea, the marksman out of Kentucky, formerly Dayton. Those are two guys in that contention with Knueppel in this year's draft as some of the best off-ball movement shooters. And for Houston, well, listen, this does rely on Ime Udoka to fix some of the offensive problems. One thing Ime Udoka has not done a great job of in his coaching career is coach half-court offense. I do think more talent, more shooting skill will alleviate some of that just naturally. Having that kind of talent, having a player who knows how to move without the ball will just open up natural opportunities on drives with a good relocation shooter here in Knueppel. But at the same time, if you're trying to maximize Knueppel, you might want to run some floppy action, which is something you don't see a lot in the NBA anymore, but still could be valuable. You might want to run some flex action. Hey, you might want to run some wide pins. You might want to run some ghost screens. A lot of these things can be very good. And to be fair, there are some things Houston already does when it comes to small screening for Şengün. I think Knueppel can be an upgraded version of that. We saw Fred VanVleet do it a lot. Jalen Green do it a little bit for Houston. I think Knueppel can be an elite screener for Alperen Şengün. So there's some real functionality here that the Rockets can pull out of Knueppel. It just comes down to whether or not the coaching staff can be creative enough to not only see it, but to have it executed. And I'm hoping that we see that more. The Rockets with Reed Shepherd having a bigger role next year, and hopefully Knueppel, unless this pick gets traded for Devin Booker or Giannis or something. And Rockets fans are going to say, well, the reports say a lot of that might just be posturing. Okay, I wouldn't really worry about the reports too much. Okay. They might just be trying to save some of Jalen Green's trade value. But at the end of the day, Knueppel here specifically would fit really great into Houston if they do keep this pick. And I think it's a home run hit for them if they do pick him at number 10. Pick number 11, the Portland Trailblazers move down a spot. Man, what a fit Cooper Flagg would have been here, huh? Unlucky for them. They moved down to 11 instead of moving up in the lottery. And with this pick, I do have the Portland Trailblazers here selecting guard Jace Richardson out of Michigan State. And there is going to be some groans. There's going to be some moans with this pick. I understand that. Jace Richardson did not measure in well. Just a hair over 6 feet tall without shoes on. There's going to be a lot of concerns. He's not a true primary point guard. People are going to be looking at this and saying, why would we pick him in the lottery? Why would we pick him at 11 if he's so little? And we already have Scoot Henderson. We have Shaedon Sharpe. We have Anthony Simons. Well, first of all, I think Anthony Simons very likely could get moved. Jace Richardson, I think a very good off-ball player, adept off-ball player. Well, yes, he is smaller, isn't your typical combo guard size. I think he still can return combo guard value. At the end of the day, his listed height without shoes on really doesn't matter. What matters is all of the film we've watched all year long. 2 weeks ago, no one would have batted an eye about Jace Richardson being pick 11. Now everyone with the combine here is going to freak out because, oh, he measured small. Well, guess what? He didn't shrink from the end of the regular season in college basketball. I think everyone's got to take a deep breath here. Everyone panicked the same way last year with Reed Shepherd, Rob Dillingham. Both of them were still top 10 picks in 2024. Reed Shepherd went as high as pick number 3. Well, yes, Jace Richardson isn't as good as Reed Shepherd in my opinion at all. I prefer Reed Shepherd a lot as a prospect over Jace Richardson right now. I could still see Portland valuing him as an off-ball, on-ball combination, whether Scoot Henderson's on the floor or not. Fitting him around Donovan Clingan in dribble handoffs as a playmaking hub, I think fits really well here. Portland, this is a tricky spot for them at 11, but still an outcome that I think works out pretty well for them. Moving on to pick number 12, the Chicago Bulls here, a team that I think very, very, very much wants to improve their core nucleus presently. And I say that specifically because I don't think we're taking a long-term approach here for Chicago in this draft pick. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to draft someone who has a super low ceiling, because I think the player they're going to draft here really wins in a lot of areas when it comes to feel, IQ, intelligence. And for the Chicago Bulls at pick number 12, I have them selecting forward Collin Murray-Boyles out of South Carolina, a prospect that I do think is extremely valuable in a very unique way. This is a player who has been getting compared to Draymond Green, and when it comes to my own comparisons for him, while I don't think Draymond Green is really the best comparison because Draymond is a first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the smartest players ever, an extremely cerebral offensive player who is selfless at the heart of it, I don't think CMB has all of the qualities that has made Draymond Green the player he has been throughout his career, but I do see some of the resemblance in terms of the playmaking IQ, the selflessness, the passing vision. I think there are some areas where CMB is a better scorer than Draymond Green as well. I think he leverages his body positioning better as a play finisher at the rim. Now, Draymond Green sometimes gets a little hesitant as a scorer, and I think CMB has more of that natural instinct to go get a bucket if he needs to. Now, he does have some deficiencies at the NBA game that's going to prohibit him from ever being a 1A or even 2A option for a half-court offense. So, again, I do understand some of the comparisons. I do think they are different players. I think comparisons can sometimes be a dangerous game to play with prospects. I still do think about that a lot because I do think finding comparisons is beneficial for kind of envisioning a role a player can fill on a team. But at the same time, you want to be careful because anytime you envision a perfect comparison, then you're expecting, okay, well, what if this guy lands in a different team context? Or what if he lands in a different city, different team around him? There's just so many things that could prevent that actual comparison from coming fully true. With CMB specifically here in Chicago, I think his fit can be extremely additive around the pull-up jump shooting of Kobe White, which has continued to progress in a major fashion, winning multiple players of the week this past year for the Bulls. He was absolutely dominant for stretches of time. Josh Giddey and the pace that he brings into their full court offense, I think, is very valuable. I could see CMB being a very effective play finisher off of that, and also a connective piece of tissue into the Bulls team offense, where as they continue to ramp up their pace and hopefully at some point add meaningful shooting around this core off the ball for Chicago, I think CMB can be a guy who, hey, Josh Giddey throws a nice hit-ahead pass to Murray-Boyles, and then from there, Murray-Boyles makes another swing pass or a downhill play in transition and then swings it out to an open shooter in the corner. There's a lot of value there. And then obviously with Nikola Vucevic right now in the current iteration of the Bulls, you do have someone who can kind of masquerade as a stretch five and pull opposing bigs out a bit. Now, the matchups become questionable here too, because if you do put a big on Collin Murray-Boyles defensively, then who's guarding Vucevic? Can Vucevic really enact enough danger as a post-up option still for the Bulls to have a good offense, and how does that mesh into their half-court pace and spacing that they want to play with? So I do think there would be questions to still figure out for Billy Donovan and the Bulls coaching staff, but I do think this is still a quite good get for Chicago at this spot in the draft. Moving on to pick 13. The Atlanta Hawks here now, remember, able to get this pick because of that top 12 protection. And for Atlanta, this is a really great outcome, and it gives them the ability to add more playmaking around Trae Young. And with their current president of basketball operations search, there is some unique relationships that we have to take into consideration. One of them being with prospect Egor Demin from BYU. And I think some of the ties here between the Atlanta Hawks organization, some of their positional and skill set needs that they have on their roster, would bring a lot of attention to Egor Demin, someone who has been in and around the lottery pretty much all draft process long now at this point. And I have the Hawks here scooping him up at 13, looking at his positional size. If you're envisioning him as a bigger, better Vit Krejci in their backcourt, that's something I could see Quinn Snyder finding a lot of value in, especially with his creative play design. Egor Demin's passing vision, his pass velocity, which is something I've mentioned multiple times in previous mock drafts, and his ability to pass over the top of the defense with that size would become a very valuable asset for Quinn Snyder in certain play calls. I think about some of the Spain action that they run. You think about the Ram action. A lot of different things that they can do, and I think Egor Demin's passing specifically would be very additive with Jalen Johnson, who's becoming one of the best short roll players in the entire NBA. I think there's a ton of value here in that regard as well. Now, I do think Egor Demin comes with his own set of flaws. The Hawks, I think their backcourt specifically around Trae Young has been very non-shooting oriented with Dyson Daniels, Terrence Mann, who I know people are going to say, well, he shot the ball so well this year. Yeah, he's a hesitant non-shooter. He's not really going to shoot a ton, especially come playoff time. If the Hawks make it back into the playoffs at some point, teams are going to be okay with Terrence Mann shooting threes. So while, yes, the numbers might say one thing, I think the actual eye test and watching the games suggests something completely different, even if he has ramped up volume in Atlanta. And then when it comes to Egor Demin, while the volume is there, the three-point attempt rate is there, the success hasn't been in college. So that might be part of being miscast as a true full-on point guard around Trae Young. He's not going to be on the ball nearly as much as he was required to be at times for BYU, and I think that'll be a good thing for his efficiency. But again, if you're drafting him for the upside perspective here with his positional size, that means you're envisioning him as a point guard. I look at him more as a wing who can exhibit some point guard playmaking qualities without really being a true point guard. I don't trust the handle enough. While I do love the passing vision and feel there, I don't trust the scoring from the point guard position enough. So I do think Egor Demin's more of a connector than an actual true point guard initiator. But I do think in Quinn Snyder's offense with the set plays that he runs and demonstrates frequently, I do think Egor Demin could be a pretty good fit into that offensive system specifically. Then we move on to San Antonio at pick number 14. This pick, very important one for them, one that I could definitely see them using as a trade chip to prioritize long-term flexibility. Remember, last year they traded out of pick number 8, which became Rob Dillingham for the Minnesota Timberwolves, and in return the Spurs got future assets in 2031 and a pick swap as well in 2030, which has ultimately been part of other moves in the acquisition of De'Aaron Fox. So could San Antonio look to do something similar again with this pick? Very possible. But if they do keep the pick here, 14th overall, I have been selecting in this mock draft forward Noah Essengue, who falls just a little bit further than where we've typically seen him going. And he is an interesting prospect for sure. Someone who has really great length, physical tools. He's extremely fluid. And given the fact that there were a ton of reports and rumors last year stating that San Antonio, had they kept pick number 8 and had this prospect been available, they would have selected him. And of course, I'm talking about forward Tidjane Salaün out of Cholet, who ultimately did get drafted a couple picks ahead of them by Charlotte. Salaün had a very rough rookie season. I'm wondering if the Spurs are looking at that and saying, well, maybe we lucked out. Let's try and learn from this. Or they could look at a prospect who has very similar physical gifts and is probably a better prospect, pretty significantly, than Tidjane Salaün. Tidjane Salaün was more of this idea of a forward prospect. I think Noah Essengue is a more realized version of that. He is just a flat-out better play finisher than Salaün ever really was as a prospect. Essengue is a better shooter than Salaün. I think a more reliable play finisher at the rim, above the rim. I think just a quicker, more agile athlete even than Tidjane Salaün. But this is very much in the same frame of mind, where the Spurs are looking for someone long, athletic, who can be a play finisher off of De'Aaron Fox, off of Victor Wembanyama. And I think Essengue is a guy who gives them length, size, defensive skills that can definitely be additive as well here. So for the Spurs at 14, I do think Essengue makes a ton of sense in that regard. Another guy who has professional basketball experience, can come over, be a contributor right away in a reduced, smaller role, very similar to the role he's been playing for Ratio Farm Ulm over in Germany off of Ben Saraf and some of the other playmakers there. And I think for the Spurs specifically at 14, this is a pick I think Spurs fans are going to love and I think would be very additive into their team context, more so than it would be for some of the other teams in the top 14 here that maybe aren't looking for just one extra piece into their rotation, but more of a building block piece. I think Essengue, this is one of the better outcomes for him as well, given what San Antonio already has on the roster. Now moving out of the lottery at pick number 15, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder here via the Miami Heat. And this pick, again, a very important one for Oklahoma City, gives them the optionality in how they want to continue building their team. Obviously, some of their young guys are going to get contract extensions coming up here. So hitting on these draft picks, while it doesn't seem like a big deal right now because of how deep Oklahoma City is, making the right pick here at 15, making the right pick in the 20s, can really extend or open up their championship window even further, just by adding in better depth and guys who can kind of change the way this team plays a bit. 15th overall, I think one thing Oklahoma City is lacking is a bigger defensive-minded forward who can match up a little bit bigger in the Western Conference. So at 15, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder here, selecting forward Rasheer Fleming out of St. Joseph's. This is a pick purely predicated on the defensive side of the basketball. They're looking at a guy who is a bigger forward. They're looking at the kind of realm of the Jaden McDaniels, the Tari Easons of the world, guys who are a bit bigger. But one thing Rasheer Fleming has over someone like Jaden McDaniels, who's extremely wiry, Rasheer Fleming's got more of that typical NBA frame with the broader shoulders, the ability to exert ball pressure and really be strong at the point of attack. Obviously, McDaniels overwhelms guys with length and his athleticism and his shot blocking tools that he exhibited back at Washington. The St. Joseph prospect here, Rasheer Fleming, is quite a bit different. And unlike Jaden McDaniels, who coming out of Washington had this really unique off-the-dribble game with some scoring prowess in the mid-range that he could get to, but there were questions around the three-point shot, Rasheer Fleming's almost the exact flip side of the coin here, where the dribble, there's nothing off the dribble. There's nothing coming into the NBA. Like, teams are not going to be scared of Rasheer Fleming doing anything off the dribble against them. He is not a good driver of the basketball. I have real concerns about him attacking closeouts, and I do think this is a negative thing for Oklahoma City's offense, the way that they play. They don't have the true S-tier playmakers. Now, they have some very good ones. I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has taken some meaningful strides forward offensively as a playmaker. Still not an S-tier one, though, by any stretch of the imagination. And then you also look at someone like Isaiah Hartenstein, who really is a great playmaking hub. There is value here for Rasheer Fleming, cutting off of him and being a big physical body who can finish around the rim, something he did a lot at St. Joseph's. But at the same time, really what you're looking at is a catch-and-shoot value guy here, who shot over 39% from three this past season from college. I think there's a lot of optimism coming into his NBA career that he can maintain and hold a very respectable 36, 37, 38% three-point percentage early and into his NBA career. And And I think for the Thunder here, if you do get that ultimately where he becomes a very respectable catch and shoot option and defends at the point of attack alongside guys like Lou Dort, alongside Case and Wallace and some of the other elite defenders that OKC just is littered with, this is another different kind of body type that can help Oklahoma City in select matchups. This will help them a little bit more against an Aaron Gordon, against some of the other bigger forwards in the NBA. So for OKC, this is a depth piece, not necessarily an essential pick for them, but one that can change some of their defensive DNA just enough to match up a little bit better with some of the tougher matchups for them in the Western Conference. Moving on to pick number 16 now, the Orlando Magic here. And I have really landed on a selection here for them, if he's available at this spot, that I do really love for them. Once again, in this mock draft, the Orlando Magic select center Asa Newell out of Georgia. And I cannot reiterate enough how much I like this for Orlando as a projection pick for them, because they're looking at Asa Newell. First of all, this checks a lot of the boxes of what Orlando typically looks to do, looking for size, fluidity, athletic skills. All of those things really pop off for Asa Newell, who does present to have a bit of defensive versatility at the next level. If you want to use him as a hedge guy, if you want to play him and drop with his length and size and athleticism as a shot blocker, there's some value there. This fits really well with what Orlando wants to do defensively. And then when it comes to the Magic, upgrading their offense, of course, you guys know I'm a huge believer in the value of three-point shooting. I think that's a huge missing proponent in this Magic offense right now. But one other area where they can improve dramatically offensively is just generating second chance opportunities on some of the mid-range pull-up shots that Paulo Banchero misses off the front rim or strong. Asa Newell can be a positive offensive force for them, cleaning up some of those misses. He averaged over 3 offensive rebounds per game this past year for Georgia. So driving down from Athens to Orlando, I think there's going to be a ton of value here for Asa Newell, bringing his offensive rebounding and his touch to the Magic. This is another guy who can exert some rim gravity as well with his physical gifts. So I think for him, some of the biggest things for him to figure out mentally, offensively, is to figure out what kind of player he wants to be. Is it more at the rim, above the rim, or is it, hey, 8 to 10 feet from the rim, I can get to my little push shot? And I think from there, that kind of hybrid skill set that he possesses right now becomes a real tool for whoever's developing him, whichever team ultimately selects him. And I think at 16 here, he can be an additive offensive player without being a shooter. He has stepped out behind the three-point line and shot a bit. I'm not going to be a huge believer in that at this point of the process. Now, if you told me 5 years from now he becomes a player who is shooting, say, 34, maybe 35% from 3 on wide open threes, it wouldn't be the most shocking thing in the world, but there's a difference between betting on that and that being an outcome, right? So I don't think you need to bet on Asa Newell ever really being a shooter to believe there's going to be positive offensive impact. I think he can be a positive offensive player without ever shooting threes in the NBA. But if you are someone who wants to bet on that upside as a shooter as well, there's a little bit of extra value, maybe a little wrinkle in his offensive game that you can unlock further as well if you're Orlando. Moving on to pick 17, the Minnesota Timberwolves here via the Detroit Pistons. Obviously in a spot here now where they get to add into their already very good team. They've been a strong team again this season. Right before the beginning of the year, I asked, why are the Timberwolves not contenders again this year? Their roster is very, very good. The addition of Dante DiVincenzo was very strong for them. Obviously, Julius Randle is kind of curing some of his playoff woes that he's had in years past. And I think this Wolves team context has really helped unlock some of that as well. And the way that he's playing under coach Chris Finch has been huge for them. So at pick 17 now, Minnesota has the opportunity to just find a little bit of depth. And I think specifically looking in the front court here makes a lot of sense. At 17, I have them selecting center/forward Danny Wolf out of Michigan, a very skill-oriented player. And I think for the Wolves specifically, a team that already has so much athletic skill on their roster, with Anthony Edwards being one of the best athletic guards in the league, of course. You look at Jaden McDaniels, who I raved about earlier, as someone who wins with length and athleticism, shot blocking tools, mirroring ability defensively. They, of course, one of the most premier rim protectors and defenders in NBA history in Rudy Gobert. So this team's not really needing more of that high-level defensive presence. Now, Danny Wolf, I do think, is a smart team defender, understands how his body positioning can help, and adding another 7-footer or near 7-footer can definitely be additive still into that team context. I think specifically for Danny Wolf, landing in Minnesota is going to help him a lot, because at times, even though he can be a smart defender and a good team defender, he does get caught ball watching a bit. I think having someone like Rudy Gobert behind him could help clean up some of his defensive mistakes at this point in time. And then on offense, we've seen Danny Wolf thrive with a big man, and I think upgrading from Flagg to Rudy Gobert would be a very good thing to unlock even more of Danny Wolf's playmaking juice, more lob opportunities. I think Gobert clearly just a better athlete than Flagg. That's something that would be very beneficial for Wolf as a playmaker. Now, Gobert doesn't have the best hands in the world, so that's going to be something that there's a little bit of a learning curve probably for what kind of passes Wolf can throw to Gobert versus what he was throwing previously to Golden on 45 action. And then offensively as well, outside of just working with Gobert, I think you have a unique screen short roll type player here. Someone who can make reads out of the pocket. And of course, you're betting on some of that offensive touch as well as a scorer. Times this year for Michigan exhibited the step back three, exhibited floaters, just a little bit of everything in the bag of Danny Wolf. And I think that's what Minnesota, if you're drafting here, you already have so many good players, so much talent already. This either becomes a pick you can afford to trade to try and reopen up future flexibility, or you try and use this pick to kind of fill some gaps and needs, and just drafting a skilled 7-footer here gives you optionality into your lineups moving forward, especially since they drafted 2 guards last year in Dillingham and Terrence Shannon Jr. Probably go into the front court here, get someone who can be a hybrid big, play a little bit of the 4, a little bit of the 5, and help you in that area throughout the course of a long 82-game regular season. Pick number 18, the Washington Wizards here now. This pick via the Memphis Grizzlies, and I think at 18 for Washington specifically, if they're looking at ways to meaningfully improve their team long term, I've been very guard focused for them in my previous mock drafts. At 18 here, I'm going to try and avoid that, going with a wing instead. In forward, Carter Bryant, a BPA type option here for the Wizards, who just go best player available. Looking at someone like Carter Bryant, who is a very gifted athlete, very physically built. You look at his body frame, his shoulders, he's got big, broad, wide shoulders. He's someone who looks like an NBA player, and I think that's going to be very helpful for him throughout this week with the NBA Draft Combine. I think teams, executives, owners especially are going to see him up close and in person, and they're going to say, this guy looks like he belongs in the NBA. He jumps out of the gym. That very much shows up in his rim half-court efficiency when he does get to the rim, which is pretty low volume because of how low of a usage player he was. Just didn't get to the rim a ton, mostly off of cuts, but there's a lot of functionality in there where he finished at the rim extremely well when he got there, can finish above the rim very consistently and effectively. And I think for Washington specifically, they have taken already some creation bets previously. Obviously, Alex Sarr can be a floor spacing big man for you if you want to use him that way moving forward, which is very probable. For Washington, you have Bub Carrington, who they drafted, someone who's going to handle the ball quite a bit. I think for the Wizards specifically, forward Carter Bryant, I think is a very good addition around those pieces. Obviously, I have yet to mention Bilal Coulibaly, but I got to show him some love. He's a very gifted physical athlete as well. I think the Wizards can add into their defensive context here. Carter Bryant, someone who's an off-ball exclusive player at the next level, but I think there's some real value that you can extract from him, especially at pick number 18 in this year's class. Moving on to pick number 19, the Brooklyn Nets with their second pick of 4 total first-rounders in this year's draft. And this pick via Milwaukee is a good opportunity for Brooklyn to take another swing on a talented player. And this is specifically under the notion that the Nets could look to accelerate the rebuild a bit here. And that's something Sean Marks has done previously, and I could see him doing again, looking to take a win-now player in forward Nique Clifford out of Colorado State, someone who had a very, very, very good season in college basketball this most recent year, building off of the year he had a year ago and then ramping it up to a whole nother level. He was the shortest player in all of college basketball to average over 9.5 rebounds per game. His productivity is very similar to someone like Dylan Jones from Weber State that we saw in the 2024 NBA draft class. I think for Nique specifically here, at number 19, I think Brooklyn's one of the few teams that can afford him an opportunity to play on the ball a bit early in his NBA career, depending on what happens, what shakes out throughout the course of free agency and everything. And I think within Jordi Fernandez's offensive context with dribble handoffs and playing with the pacing and space, delay action, and everything that is entailed there in Brooklyn, Clifford can be someone who plays off of handoffs, plays out of advantage, scores in those ways, and his shot making, which has been a huge revelation from where he was early in his college career at Colorado to now where he's been with the Colorado State Rams the last few years. If you believe in Nique Clifford's jump shot and his ability to continuously make threes in the NBA, this is a huge possible steal for the Brooklyn Nets. Now, I am a little long-term concerned about his exact role in the league and if you can maximize his play style in that way. We've seen other guys who have been somewhat ball-dominant college players like Jarrett Culver, like Terrence Shannon Jr. as a few examples, who come into the NBA and the game, oh, my team's not really catered to me anymore. How do I fit in? How do I exert my skill set? I think that's one of the questions for Nique Clifford, but with that in mind, I think Brooklyn's offensive context is one of the best landing spots for him to still maximize him in a reduced role going forward into his NBA career. Pick number 20, the Miami Heat here now via the Golden State Warriors, of course. On the heels of the Jimmy Butler trade, Miami now using this asset in a way to further their franchise is going to be essential for them. And at number 20, I have them selecting forward Will Riley out of Illinois. I think one of the biggest things that this team was lacking post Jimmy Butler was another shot maker, another shot creator off the wing. And if you're looking at Will Riley from the glass half full perspective, those are the skills that he possesses. Someone who can handle the ball at his size with some real guard tools to work with. He's fairly quick with the basketball in his hands, a pretty reliable first step, obviously has exerted and showcased a ton of pull-up shot making and the willingness to take some difficult shots off the dribble. And I think we've seen enough playmaking juice off of that as well. Some of the driving kick. Of course, Miami Heat fans are going to know some of Jimmy Butler's driving kicks would drive you insane with some of the passes he'd turn up. And I just think for Miami here at number 20 specifically, Will Riley can be a guy that is the next iteration of scoring for Miami Heat basketball in the half court. Obviously, you have someone very skilled in Bam Adebayo who can do a little bit of everything for you offensively, can handle, play make, can score the ball, has a lot of touch. I think if you're looking for more half court skill around him, you already have the big man there. Now with Khalil Ware, who's going to be an integral piece for Bam moving forward as a lob threat, play finisher archetype. I think Will Riley's another guy who can be a scorer, play off of DHOs, get to certain spots on the floor, score the basketball himself, and create a little bit for others. And I think that value specifically for Miami at pick number 20 is going to be a very beneficial pickup for them, especially this late in the first round in the 2025 NBA draft. Moving on to pick number 21, the Utah Jazz here now via the Minnesota Timberwolves, and for Utah specifically, with another chance here in the first round to add more young talent, add to their existing core nucleus of players. At 21, I have them going with guard Nolan Traore out of France. And I think specifically for Traore, who's been on a bit of a hot streak as of late, some of his best basketball this professional season has been played in the last couple of weeks here. And I think he is building up his resume and his record just enough to really solidify himself as a surefire top 25 pick in this draft, and very likely could even go a little bit higher than number 21. This is one of the hard things with creation bets. A team like Washington at 18, I strongly considered Traore there, but they did just invest in Bub Carrington last year. Would they make that investment again on another guard in this year's draft? That's the big question. For Utah, I ultimately did land on Traore because while yes, you did draft Isaiah Collier last year, you drafted him at 29 instead of 14 like Washington did with Bub Carrington. So it's just a different level of investment, and one that I think Utah, even though Collier, for all of his standards and where he was drafted, had a pretty successful rookie season despite being a terrible defender and someone who really can't shoot the basketball yet. I think for the Jazz, they're looking at Traore and still taking that long-term approach. Traore coming into this year was someone who was viewed as a potential top 5 prospect. Season just hasn't played out that way. Remember last year, Isaiah Collier was viewed as a top 5 pick. Again, someone who was the number 1 recruit in his high school class. He fell all the way to 29 before Danny Ainge and Justin Zanuck scooped him up. So at 21, could I see the Jazz do the same thing here with Traore, who has some real downhill skills, can get to the rim at ease, very, very fluid as a ball handler. The decision-making is coming along in a nice way. Really, the biggest thing is going to be the shot making, and it's going to be a repetitive problem in Utah if they continue taking this type of player. If you're going to have the ball in this guy's hands, same issue that you have with Isaiah Collier, teams are just going to go under screens. Teams are going to duck him, gap him, play off of him, sag off of him, and there's going to be real ramifications from that limit your offense. And Defensively, there's some problems here as well. Utah was one of the worst defensive teams in the NBA this past year. Part of that is because they were extremely young. The other part of that is they're playing bad defensive players. Isaiah Collier is a bad defensive player. Bryce Sensabaugh, a terrible defensive player. Utah cannot afford to continue just flat out playing bad defenders for the next 5 to 7 years, okay? That's going to be one of the biggest problems for them if they don't figure out how to put together an effective team defense. I do not think Nolan Traore is an effective step forward in that regard. But at number 21 specifically, you're betting on the offensive upside, the creation tools, and the skill set to get 2 feet in the paint, get downhill, score the basketball, and play make for others. And I think at 21, it is a reasonable investment in this year's draft. Moving in to pick number 22, the Atlanta Hawks on the board once again after going with Egor Demin at number 13. They're going to look to address their front court long-term. Clint Capella is a free agent this offseason, and with Atlanta off of his contract now at this point, finding a backup big man behind Edgecombe, who took over the starting job for Capella about halfway through this past season, is essential. And for the Hawks at 22, I have them here selecting center Thomas Sorber out of Georgetown, one of the most polarizing prospects in this year's draft. You're going to find some people who are really, really high on Thomas Sorber. They're going to make a bet on his offensive game, specifically his skill set with his face-up game to the basket, where he's able to win out of triple threat, has a very quick rip-through move that he's able to get to the rim with. Obviously has exerted some real mid-range shot-making prowess as well. And then there's hope that maybe he can expand his game, stretch out to the three-point line. He was a very non-productive three-point shooter this past year, though, for Georgetown. So that's a real question and bet that I'm not really comfortable making at this point. And I do think there's some concerns defensively that I have, specifically the fact that he's not this huge center. He's not Khaman Maluach standing at about 7'1", 7'2", right? Thomas Sorber is 6'10", and you might say, well, but you like Derik Queen, so why don't you like Thomas Sorber as much? Derik Queen's a lot more mobile, a lot more lateral fluidity, more comfortable guarding and challenging on the perimeter. But there is one real silver lining in Sorber's game specifically. While I don't love his size and I think drop coverage might be a challenge for him at times, the numbers don't agree with me. The numbers and the analytics suggest he had one of the best rim presences in college basketball this past year when he was on the court before his injury. He was deterring guys and forcing a lot of misses around the rim. And I do think if you look at his block rate, he's obviously very vertically athletic. There are some tools here, and I think for Atlanta specifically, who's been very focused on building a better team defense around Trae Young, they've added long wings, athletic wings, forwards who can really defend. Jalen Johnson, Zachary Sachet, obviously headliners, Dyson Daniels, who is an absolute menace on the ball, generating havoc and forcing turnovers. I do think Atlanta putting a real rim protector here, someone who can block shots and is going to bring that kind of presence to the back end of their defense, would provide even more further value around Trae Young defensively. Now, I think there's going to be a lot of refining and retuning in Sorber's game and the way that he plays, and that's something that's hard to do. If you're trying to rewire a player's DNA on how to play the game, it's going to take a little bit of time to really maximize that guy. So I think for Quinn Snyder and the Hawks, it's going to be a little bit of a process here. I don't think the year one results are going to be elite for Sorber if he lands in Atlanta specifically off of Trae Young, but there's a lot of gifts and tools here to work with, and that's why the Hawks roll the dice here at number 22 with Thomas Sorber. Pick 23, the Indiana Pacers here now, and I love this mock pick selection for them. I'm not going to lie. At number 23, I have the Indiana Pacers selecting wing Cedric Coward out of Washington State. Very, very polarizing player to talk about here as well. He is transferring from Washington State after just 6 games with the Cougars after a shoulder injury that ended his season prematurely. Coward is one of the prospects in this year's draft that has a very unique pathway to the class, specifically given the fact that he didn't play a ton of games this past year for Washington State, but did really excel in those games, averaging over 17 points, shot over 50% from the floor, over 40% from three, shined in an on-ball, off-ball role for the Cougars, where at times he was spotting up, moving off of drives, playing as a relocation shooter a little bit, then at other times flex some of his physical gifts as a play finisher, someone who can handle the ball a bit, get downhill for himself. This is, again, a little bit of an older prospect, a junior coming out of college basketball, but for Indiana specifically, part of the reason I love this for him, you're looking at landing in a situation where you already have 2 high-volume ball handler creator types in Of course, Tyrese Halliburton, who has scaled back his on-ball volume a bit in the last 12 months. And then also looking at Pascal Siakam, another underrated creator, someone who has one of the most deadly spin moves in NBA history. Very unique physical gifts for a forward in the NBA. And then I think with those two guys already in place and the way that Indiana plays with their pace, spacing, Rick Carlisle's ability to adapt offensively, for a while, his end of tenure in Dallas, I was looking at Rick Carlisle as a guy who was struggling to really adjust to the newest iteration of basketball, but that has completely changed after the Pacers landed Tyrese Halliburton. It has led to a complete revolution of how the Pacers play offensively and the way that they're able to attack mismatches and take advantage of teams in certain ways. And I think Cedric Coward becomes such a good off-ball fit off of that as someone who can be an off-ball plus player where he predominantly is going to work off-ball next to Halliburton. But when he does catch the ball, if there's an aggressive closeout, Coward can be a guy who gets downhill, scores the ball for himself, of course, has some real scoring knack and tools. And I think this is a player who, first of all, I haven't mocked him in the first round all year long. Now he's getting mocked here at number 23. I do think that teams and executives are really looking at Coward as a real possibility. Part of why I've been hesitant to mock him when he chose to transfer to Duke, when he chose to go into the NBA draft process with the idea of transferring to Duke as the likely outcome at the end of this, I thought more than likely he'd be a Blue Devil next season. But with the buzz I'm hearing, with some of the thoughts I'm hearing from some of the teams right now, Cedric Coward very likely will stay in the NBA draft. I think there's a really good chance of that, especially if he's a strong combine week this week. We could see him keep his name in the class here and ultimately forego the remainder of his college eligibility, ultimately pass on actually ever being a Duke Blue Devil, and after just 6 games at Washington State, could hear his name called in the first round of the 2025 NBA draft. Moving on to pick number 24, the Oklahoma City Thunder here now. This pick is, of course, a swap with the Clippers. And for Oklahoma City, after going with Rasheer Fleming at number 15, they come back here now at 24 and go with guard/wing LeBaron Philon out of Alabama. And I think a lot of the attention for LeBaron Philon this year from a lot of people around the draft community has really centered on his offensive game. Some of the rim half-court efficiency, some of the rim half-court volume specifically, where he's able to get downhill pretty well, has some unique deceleration skills, and obviously very good at gathering the basketball, staying on balance, and then making plays off of that. But I think the biggest thing, and specifically why OKC drafts him here, the Thunder win the possession battle night in, night out, and one of the biggest reasons they do, they protect the basketball themselves, they don't turn it over a ton, and they cause a ton of turnovers for other teams. And I think for Philon specifically, a near 3% steal rate this year on a team that really struggles defensively historically. Alabama under Nate Oates has just never been a good defensive team. Of course, part of that is they play at such a high pace and they value offense so much. But Philon was a defensive event creator for them. Did it in a variety of ways, on the ball, off the ball. I think there's some real value here. You put him into a better team defensive context, a stickier team defense in general, like Oklahoma City, where playing against them sometimes can feel like you're running through a swamp. You just don't have the mobility you want. Obviously, OKC is a very physical team defense as well. I think Philon can be another really additive defensive piece for them after going with Rasheer Fleming, giving them a different kind of bigger defender there in their front court. You come back here, get another guy who just fits your current team identity context, adds a little bit more depth for the long 82-game regular season in case of injuries, whatever may happen long-term with Case and Wallace. When you have to extend some of these guys, you're going to have to make some tough decisions, likely if you're Oklahoma City. But LeBaron Philon, I think defensively can be someone who slots in nearly right away and have real value for Mark Daigneault's defense there in Oklahoma City. Moving on to pick number 25, the Orlando Magic, after going with Asa Newell at number 16, they're able to still come back here and get a high-volume shooter at pick number 25. Here I have them selecting guard Walter Clayton Jr. out of Florida, and I think Magic fans are really going to love this pick. Walter Clayton Jr., one of the more divisive prospects in this year's draft, of course, rode into the NCAA tournament with a huge hot streak as he played out the ultimately NCAA playoffs into a championship run for Florida. Boy, was Walter Clayton Jr. very, very good during that stretch of games where he was just an utterly dominant half-court player, felt like he could get wherever he wanted on the court against some of the best teams in college basketball. And I think for Florida specifically here, what you're looking at doing if you're Orlando, you walk away with Walter Clayton Jr., someone who can create shots for himself, can really shoot the three ball well. That's been exhibited throughout his entire college career. And I think for Orlando, you finally have a guard who is a real true three-point threat both on and off the basketball. I think this is a really good surrounding talent draft for Orlando. In the last couple of years, I haven't loved their picks as much. Tristan da Silva, I thought was a pretty good player, but I just didn't see the overall fit a ton in Orlando. I didn't really like the Jett Howard pick. I do think Anthony Black defensively brings a ton of value to the Magic, so I didn't hate that one. But I think Walter Clayton Jr. here and Asa Newell in this mock draft specifically really changed the team identity offensively in a positive way for the Magic going into future playoff runs in their half-court offensive team context. Moving on to pick 26, the Nets on the clock for picks 3 and 4 here back-to-back at 26 and 27. This first one, I have them going with guard Ben Saraf out of Ratio Farm Ulm. And I think specifically here, this is a huge value pick for the Brooklyn Nets. And I see some comments sometimes saying that, wow, you're lower on this guy than I thought. Remember, this is not a big board. If you want to see where I actually have a lot of these prospects ranked, go check out my big board. Came out last week on the channel. For Ben Saraf, I like him a lot as a player. I do think, though, when you're looking at some of these creation bets and how they're going to fit into NBA teams, there are teams who are going to pass on guys who are more of the dribble pass-oriented players instead of the off-ball catch-shoot-go players. Saraf specifically here for Brooklyn, I think fits in quite well with the Nets, just like I talked about with Nique Clifford, being able to play off of handoffs. There's ways for Ben Saraf to show his on-ball value while being still somewhat of a predominant off-ball player at times and stretches in the way that the Nets offense runs and works. And I think specifically for Saraf, I think the Nets could also give him opportunities to actually be a large on-ball player for them, someone who has the ball in his hands a decent amount of the time, creating for guys around him like Cam Johnson, Nick Claxton, and others. And I think for Brooklyn specifically, if you do go into this draft and walk away with guys like Nique Clifford and Ben Saraf, you're going to be pretty happy with your overall offensive progression from what you had a year ago to what you have now, where the team is just better. You just have more good players. You have more guys capable of dribbling, passing, and shooting. You have players who are productive in different ways. Nique Clifford, I talked about his rebounding as a wing. There's just a lot of small value that the Nets can improve their team on, and it's really just in the traditional core aspects of basketball: scoring, passing, rebounding. And I think Saraf, Nique Clifford specifically, both address some of those key needs. And then at 27, the Nets have another opportunity here to improve their team pretty significantly. So at 27, I have the Brooklyn Nets here selecting wing Noah Penda out of Lamont. And this is another defensive-minded pick for Brooklyn, where we talked about Ben Saraf and Nique Clifford specifically, their offensive skills being very additive for Brooklyn. Now you're getting one of the better isolation defenders in this entire draft class in Noah Penda, who's had a ton of success playing professional basketball over there in France and finding a lot of success playing in a situation where he's guarding on the basketball a decent amount, guarding up and down the lineup just a little bit. And then obviously there's been a huge slating of Noah Penda just being a 3-and-D player. I do think there's a little bit more to uncover yet in his game as well. I think there's a little bit of playmaking juice in here that makes him valuable, kind of reminiscent of what Josh Green was coming out of Arizona, not as an overall prospect, but specifically the passing tools. And I think for Noah Penda specifically, someone who can facilitate, can create offense for others just a little bit as a guy when he attacks closeouts, he can make the extra pass, can make the right read with a live dribble here and there. I think there's a lot of times where Josh Green was able to do that too early in his career for the Dallas Mavericks, at times for the Charlotte Hornets this past year. I think for the Nets specifically, Noah Penda is a guy who is very additive to their team defense, of course, someone who's going to probably align as a point of attack defender for them, but also can be additive offensively as a catch and shoot threat, and also someone who can attack a closeout, make the right read, make the next pass, and really just add into their overall team offensive flow a bit more without needing to be on the ball a whole lot around some of their other picks in this draft, like a Nique Clifford, like a Ben Saraf, who we just most recently picked at 26. Moving on to pick number 28 now, the Boston Celtics here have an opportunity to add a little bit more length and size into their front court. Of course, Kristaps Porzingis has dealt with injuries throughout his career, now dealing with a bit of an ailment throughout the playoffs here that stems back from March, which is very unusual. But at number 28, the Celtics probably looking at their team long-term and trying to find ways to improve it while you're going to have to make some sacrifices, whether it's money cuts where, hey, we have to let go of Porzingis maybe in a trade, or, hey, Al Horford's in his late 30s. How much longer can we rely on him? Boston's going to have some tough roads to cross here. So at 28, I have them drafting center/forward Maxime Reynaud out of Stanford. This is a guy who you're going to start seeing a lot in my first-round mocks. I think this is a true first-round player. Maxime Reynaud is a player who's going to generate a ton of buzz between now and the draft on June 25th. My birthday, by the way. Shout out to that. And Boston here specifically, getting Maxime Reynaud at number 28 is a really great outcome for them because he has a lot of physical tools. He's very, very mobile for his size, has thrown down windmill dunks in transition. You know, it's not the most functional athleticism. It's not like he's this, grade 100th percentile athlete or anything. But given his overall height, size, length, he's a very much so a plus athlete. And I think for Boston specifically, that benefits them in a lot of ways in the way that they want to guard. If you do want to play him at the 4, we've seen the Celtics run 2 big lineups in the past. Think back to Al Horford, Rob Williams. You think under Joe Mazzulla with Al Horford, Kristaps Porzingis on the court. Obviously, they've found a lot of value in Luke Kornet as well. I think Maxime Reynaud can be an additive player around any of their existing big men, because one thing that Reynaud added to his game this year was really stretching the floor. Had always been a little bit of a shooter in his college career, but has really expanded on that this year. And shot a lot more threes, and I think it was very beneficial for his overall offensive projection into the NBA especially. So at 28, the Celtics get a guy who, once again, can stretch the floor for them a bit as a big, can play off the top of the key, but mobile enough to attack closeouts, defend out on the perimeter a little bit, get out in transition and score. I think there's just a lot of small, little nuanced value here for the Celtics at number 28. Pick number 29, the Phoenix Suns here now, via the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I think for Phoenix specifically, again, a very difficult pick for me to continue projecting, just given the amount of variance and possible decisions this Suns front office makes long-term. But at number 29 here, I do have the Phoenix Suns selecting forward Liam McNeely out of UConn. Slides quite a bit in this mock draft, all the way down to nearly the end of the first round at number 29. And for the Suns specifically, with Liam McNeely's ability to catch and shoot the basketball, something that didn't necessarily show up in the stats this year for UConn, wasn't the most successful season. I think he was a bit miscast in the way that Dan Hurley looked to use him as a movement shooter. This is one of the big differentials here between a guy like Liam McNeely and, for me, a player who I really like in Kobe Brea. Kobe Brea is a better movement shooter, someone who's more comfortable getting his feet set, playing off of movement and scoring the ball in that way, whereas Liam McNeely's more of your traditional spot-up guy, doesn't really shoot the ball off of movement as well, doesn't shoot the ball off the dribble as well, and I think there were some concerns and some limitations that UConn's offense ultimately did hard cap Liam McNeely, and I think that's a very good indicator of how limited Liam McNeely's ceiling is in the NBA. He's not going to be this hugely plus player where you put the ball in his hands and let him score. Like, I think a lot of us already know that. Many of you watching are going to be aware of this, right? But the reason I'm stating this specifically is for Phoenix, one of the biggest problems that this team has been having too many on-ball players, too many skilled on-ball pieces who don't know how to play off the ball or don't as effectively play off the ball as they do on it. And I think Liam McNeely, going from UConn where he was a little miscast to Phoenix where he would be properly placed in a role where, hey, go stand in the corner. As soon as Devin Booker draws a double team, you're getting the ball, shoot it. Like, basically the role Ryan Dunn had, right? As soon as you put him in that role, that's when you're starting to cook with gas a little bit here. And I think Liam McNeely, his positional size, rebounding, there's a lot of small ways he can impact a game that isn't going to get talked enough about because he's not a big man, so no one cares about rebounding unless it's a center, basically, in the draft community, which I don't understand. There's a lot of wings forwards who can really rebound the ball. There's a lot of value in that, in the possession battle. But Liam McNeely, I think he's going to help you in that way. And I think also specifically for Phoenix, he's an off-ball centric player, and that's what Phoenix needs more of. They need more guys who are capable off the ball to maximize their guys who are on the ball. And I think with Bradley Beal definitely not going anywhere, Kevin Durant likely traded, Devin Booker probably staying in Phoenix, it makes Liam McNeely a very, very good fit for the Suns around the Booker-Beal combination in the backcourt for Phoenix. And now at pick number 30, the final pick of the first round, the Los Angeles Clippers here via that swap with the Thunder we talked about earlier. And at number 30, I have the Clippers here selecting forward Adou Thiero from Arkansas, someone who I am very, very curious to see where he ultimately goes on draft night. As you can tell in these mock drafts, I've had him all over the place. Earlier in the process, before his injury, I had him flirting with that lottery territory. Now, all the way down at the end of the first round, I think there are going to be some teams who do express concerns because of the limited three-point volume and the lack of three-point success. Shot just 25% from three this past year for Arkansas. He is a junior as well coming out of college, so he's not the young, spry, 19-year-old player where you're projecting a ton of shooting growth. But at the same time, I think teams are going to undervalue a ton of things. He has a lot of small star traits. And what I mean by that is the ability to go up and rebound the basketball, go get the ball in tight proximity areas when there's traffic around him. Adou Thiero has so much functional athletic gifts that he's going to stand out from other players in this draft. I firmly believe it. I'm all in on Adou Thiero in a big way right now because I just flat out think this guy's going to be really impactful and he's going to be very, very good for teams. Whichever team gets him is going to be very, very happy with the results because he's going to be impactful in whatever role defensively you want to have him in. I think there's value on the ball defensively, but I think most of his value is going to stem from off the ball value, where he can be an impactful low man helper. He can be a really great nail helper if you want to go out and double the ball aggressively at the top of the key. If you want to use him as another drive helper in the gaps, that's something he just naturally does very, very well and did great for Arkansas. He's an instinctive cutter, shot over 60% on twos, had an insane free throw rate, which I think is another indicator of his athletic physical gifts that he possesses. This is a home run pick for the Clippers. This helps them tremendously defensively alongside some of their other point of attack guys that they already have in Derek Jones Jr., Chris Dunn. I think this is a really great fit next to Ivica Zubac, kind of strengthening their defensive front as well on the back end of their team. Like this, Adou Thiero is just going to fill a ton of gaps and needs for a team, and no one's going to talk about it enough. I think this is a really, really great gift for the Clippers. I don't know where he's going to go on draft night. I feel like if he didn't get hurt and played in March Madness, he would have helped himself a ton draft stock wise. This is one of the biggest wild cards. We'll see how he measures in and how everything goes at the combine. But wow, I think this could be a great, great get for the Clippers to end the first round. I really hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe as well. Really do appreciate you guys. Comment down below who your favorite prospect is if you get to this part of the video. Thanks again so much, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.